Chapter 7. The Girl. The much-needed silence was suddenly broken by a rush of nurses and doctors, frantically yelling and making calls. Lake and Adam turned their heads towards the commotion and saw the calm doctor from earlier arguing with a nurse as they wheeled the gurney down the hallway. As the gurney stopped in front of them, Lake quickly peeked over Adam's shoulder and gasped. Lying unconscious was a girl who looked to be a little older than Adam, with blood and marred skin covering her entire body. Deep wounds started, or maybe ended, at her right hip and went all the way up to where her left eye should have been. But it was impossible to see through her injuries. Her eyelid fluttered, and she painfully opened her one good eye, her gaze piercing through Lake. Her face had a heavy intensity. She lifted her injured arm and reached out to the young girl. Clearly struggling and gulping for breath, she groaned. "Help me." Lake was taken aback, but she found herself placing one foot in front of the other and moved toward the girl. Lake reached out and grabbed the girl's hand, attempting to provide comfort or to help her in some way. The girl's eye widened, but the moment was cut short as Adam instinctively pulled Lake back. The gurney started to roll forward, but the girl never broke her gaze with Lake until they turned a corner and rolled out of sight. Lake turned to Adam just as someone else approached. This time, it was a soft-spoken woman whom Adam recognized as the front desk assistant they had met earlier. Before she could say anything, Lake blurted out, "Who was that girl? What happened to her?" The woman looked down the hall in the direction the gurney had traveled just moments before, visibly hesitating for a few seconds before answering. "We're not sure who she is, but it looks like she was attacked by a bear or something." She paused, fidgeting with her lanyard, and said, "Poor thing, but we'll take good care of her," shaking her head, and then refocused on Adam and Lake and asked, "Now, who can we call to come pick you guys up?" Adam stared blankly at the woman, confusion apparent on his face, until it suddenly dawned on him that he and Lake were unharmed and couldn't stay at the hospital. However, he couldn't think of a single soul to call. The only relative he knew of was his grandma, who not only lived all the way in North Dakota, but he hadn't seen her in over 10 years and had no way to get in touch. Adam and Lake both just stared, not making a single sound or moving a muscle. It was soon apparent to the woman that they didn't have anyone to call. Pacing back and forth, she looked towards the ceiling and thought, then said, "You must be starving. Sit tight. I will go get you both something to eat." She gave the children a quick smile, then turned and hurried away. 10 minutes later, she came back armed with 2 turkey and cheese sandwiches, 2 small bags of potato chips, and 2 juice boxes. Lake got apple juice, while Adam was given some sort of berry concoction. Even though neither of them was hungry, they both sat down, unwrapped the sandwiches, and began to eat. For the next 2 hours, they sat there in stunned silence, the past 24 hours constantly replaying in their heads. Adam drearily lifted his head slightly to check the time. It was now about 2 o'clock in the morning. The still calm was a drastic change from the electric atmosphere, filled with the excited yells of hospital staff and gurneys scooting down the busy halls where they first arrived. Adam just sat there, focusing on the sound of the machines keeping his parents alive, which now echoed down the quiet and empty hallways and rang in his ears. Meanwhile, Lake was fighting back yawns, her eyes fluttering for a few seconds before she fell asleep. After what only seemed like seconds, she opened her eyes to find herself alone. She stretched and looked around, only to find that Adam was no longer next to her, and the room her parents were just in was empty. Frightened, Lake called out, "Adam? Hello? Is anyone there? Mom? Dad?" The hospital was dark, with only a few lights on, and they were eerily flickering on and off. Lake quickly stood up, still looking around. She knew something was wrong, but couldn't quite put her finger on it. She crept down the now dirty hallways, looking for someone, anyone. As she turned a corner, Lake saw some movement out of the corner of her eye. "Hello?" she called out, jerking her head to the side. There was no answer, only the echoes of her own words bouncing back at her off the hospital walls. Lake turned back to continue, but was surprised to find herself in front of an empty arcade that reminded her of Fanny's. However, instead of seeing a busy restaurant and a lively game room, she now saw a dark and ominous place. The arcade also seemingly doubled in size. The glow of the machines illuminated her path, and she had a strong feeling she needed to follow it. As she stepped closer, she couldn't shake the nagging feeling that she was supposed to find something. She followed the path until she found a door, opened it, and stepped out into the darkness of the night. She could see a storm brewing in the distance. She turned around to head back, but now she only saw tall trees where the building once stood just seconds before. Lake called out again, "Hello? Is anybody out there?" She could have sworn she saw a shadow moving in the distance, coming at her. She squinted in an attempt to look closer, only to see two glaring headlights speeding towards her. Frightened, she spun around and ran. When she did, she bumped right into a girl, her entire body wrapped up like an Egyptian mummy. The girl grabbed Lake by her upper arms, her nails digging into her skin. "Help me," the mysterious girl pleaded. "Help me."